now that we have the credit demand curve under control, we'll move on to learning objective 3, which is to understand the credit supply curve. So when we started this section, we said, where does the money come for when you get a car loan? So when you understand credit demand, it kind of makes sense. But then the question is, if I demand a certain amount of credit and I go to the bank, where does the credit availability come from? And the answer ultimately is savings. Savings is what credit supply is made of. And so it's kind of, pretty straightforward. Think about, as individuals, why do we save? So why do people save? I mean here, individuals, you and I. And I've got 5 reasons listed here that all make pretty good sense. The number one reason, by and large, is retirement. So as you go off and work, the bulk of the savings that you engage in is going to go into your retirement fund in one way or another. So lots of companies have 401k set up for their employees or some type of pension. And the bulk of your savings, either directly by you or indirectly by your employer in foregone wages, is going to go to retirement, which is saving for that future. I need to have something when I'm not working. I have to save now to accomplish that. The other reasons here, saving for my kids, that's called a bequest. So a lot of people, some of your parents may have started an education fund for you. And so that's another reason for saving, to pay off large expenses such as college, or bequests. I want to leave my kids some estate, something along those lines. We also tend to save for large purchases, such as cars and houses. So if you go off and buy a house, you're still likely to borrow money for the home purchase, but you're going to need to have some savings to make the down payment. So most down payment requirements are somewhere in the 5 to 20% range. And so if you buy a $200,000 house, you've got to have somewhere in the vicinity of $20,000 in savings in order to make that purchase, even though you're borrowing some of it. Another reason you may save, so some of you are going to leave the university with your degree and you're going to want to start your own business. And so that's going to involve some capital that you have to purchase upfront. And some people make that happen by saving. So people have saved for a number of years to develop enough funds to buy capital to start a new business. Last but not least, we also tend to save for things what we call rainy day funds. So a rainy day fund is just the weird things that can happen that are out of our control. We want to have some income saved up for that. One good reason to have those, if you think about what's happening now, is we've had this huge shock to the economy in the coronavirus pandemic. And so what that's meant is that for some workers in the economy, paychecks stopped. And that's true for firms too, right? So all of a sudden, if I worked at a restaurant or owned a restaurant, a big chunk of my revenue is gone. And so what do I do in order to manage until things go back to somewhere closer to normal? And the answer is, for a lot of people, what I call my rainy day fund. This is also known as precautionary savings. So I accumulate some savings in the event that my income takes a hit for a short period of time, and I can draw on these funds to smooth things over. So if there was ever an event that showed us how important these funds are, the current situation is one of those. Okay, so those are just some reasons why we save, and the total amount of savings accumulated is going to be available for credit demand, as we'll see how that works via the banking system in the next section here. So how does the quantity of credit supplied change with the real interest rate? So we talked about this trade-off between consumption today versus consumption in the future. Right? So one good way to think about this is if I saved $100 at a particular real interest rate, in 1 year, I'm going to have 100 times 1 plus r. Same way that I calculated what I would owe if I took out a loan. That's how much I'm going to get if I'm saving my money at a particular real interest rate. And so a good way to view this trade-off is every $100 that you consume today, instead of saving it, you're giving up 100 times 1 plus r dollars in future consumption. So if the real interest rate was 0.05, each $100 consumed today implies I'm giving up $105 that would be available for consumption in the future. And so however valuable I consider future relative to current consumption is going to affect how much I'm willing to save. As the real interest rate goes up, notice that each $100 I consume today, that's going to cost me a little bit more in the future, now $110. So as the real interest rate increases, what I say, the opportunity cost of consuming today goes up. And foregone savings, right? So what that means is that I would want to save more as R goes up, because consuming that amount today rather than saving it is going to cost me more and more as the real interest rate increases. So the quantity of credit supplied is increasing with the real interest rate. So if I was to draw a credit supply curve, I'll kind of switch over to where I've got a little bit more room here. Quantity of credit on the horizontal axis, the real interest rate on the vertical axis. Credit supply is going to be an increasing function of the real interest rate. The higher the real interest rate, the more I want to save, which is supplying credit to the credit market. Okay, so that covers the shape of the credit supply curve. The next video will understand what's going to shift this curve and in which directions.